face only. And anybody watching this recording is going to be wondering what that pillow background is. And that, anyways, that's for the fun. To give some, when you get bored, something else to think about, you ever notice how that works? Like you're in a lecture and like it's a deep lecture and then suddenly you wonder, why is that light bulb over there, right? Sometimes our brains need a distraction. And this actually, this idea may play a role in our class today. Because today we're going to discuss Torah and food. I'd say the latter is one of the Jews' favorite Jewish topics. So we're putting together two very Jewish things. I had some really bad food jokes, right? What do you call a fake noodle? An impasta. Okay.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Rabbi.
All right, my favorite one is though, what's orange and sounds like a parrot?
What?
A carrot. Get it? Okay, all right. That's enough. So
Maybe you should be a comedian.
Yeah, I'm not sure that those jokes are going to get me very far. Just my thoughts, just what I think. So to recap where we've gone. In chapter 1, we started with the question of who am I? Am I righteous? Am I wicked? We discussed how some people judge righteous and wicked based on quantity, how many good deeds versus bad deeds. We've started to explain that actually maybe it's more of an internal barometer, which is actually more important for your day-to-day life. In other words, knowing whether you'll be judged righteous or wicked in the world to come is not as important right now as where am I holding today. And where you're holding today is mostly based on your internal being. And therefore, the Tanya focuses on our internal being. And we started off discussing that we have two souls, a godly soul and an animal soul. And we jumped for a little bit into the animal soul, but then since then we've been heavy into the godly soul. So in chapter 2, we discussed the godly soul. What does it mean to be a godly soul? Where does it come from? How is it that there's differences in different Jewish people if we all have essentially the same soul? That was chapter 2, discussing the essence of the godly soul. In chapter 3, we started to discuss the buildup, the makeup, the character of this godly soul. And we discussed its 3 intellectual powers, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. We discussed the 7 emotional powers, kindness, severity, and everything that goes along with that. And we discussed how all of these faculties of the godly soul are used for godly things. So whether it's thinking Torah or being emotional towards God. Chapter 4, we discussed the garments, speech and action, and how the garments allow us to connect to God. They're the interface with which our soul can connect to God, because our soul itself, despite being very spiritual on this earth, has trouble connecting to God. We need the garments to connect to God through the Torah mitzvot. And that brought us to chapter 5, where in this discussion of discussing how we connect to God, we started to discuss how we connect to God through the Torah. Okay. And we started discussing last week how Torah is very special because it is God's will and wisdom. That's what we started to discuss, is God's will and wisdom. Once God decided that this is the law, whether that law ever comes to pass or not, that is God's will and wisdom. And therefore, through through studying Torah, you can actually connect to God himself. You can connect with his wisdom. In other words, when I do a deed for someone, I'm connecting with them because I'm doing something for them. However, when I think the way they think, then I'm connecting with them in a much deeper fashion. And that was one of the benefits of Torah over mitzvos, that you can connect to God himself. And that's why Judaism has such a stress on study of Torah, because the connection you get through study of Torah in many ways surpasses the mitzvahs. Now we're going to further our understanding of the benefit of the study of Torah. In other words, last time we discussed mostly the idea that Torah study, you can connect to God himself, because when you study something, it becomes a part of you. And through mitzvahs, It's not a part of you. It's something you're doing for them. So there's a major difference there. The unity that you get with God through study of Torah is great, is much greater than the unity that you get through doing a mitzvah. And this week, we are going to discuss a little bit talking about something that we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, which was the idea that in addition to Torah giving you a unity with God that nothing else can give you, if you recall our discussion at the end of chapter 4, we discussed how when you study something, it both encompasses you when you're first getting involved in an idea, and eventually when you fully understand it, you grasp onto it, you grab onto it, right? Again, when you first start getting to an idea, you're not fully understanding it, it's encompassing you. And when you get into it, it becomes inside of you. And this will be another element of where Torah is greater than mitzvahs, because Torah has both the, so to speak, godly light that can surround you and the godly light that can come in you. Whereas a mitzvah we'll discuss will be only the godly light that surrounds you, not so much to come inside of you. Okay? Now, this is all an important discussion. The reason why we're spending so much time discussing Torah is because people sometimes can believe and think that Torah is not that important, right? In other words, you can believe that Torah is just a practical study to help us know what to do, right? And therefore, as the old question is, what's better? Is it better to, talk the talk or walk the walk, right? You'd say it's better to walk the walk. And that's true in life in general. However, in Torah study, even if you're just going to study Torah and you don't do the mitzvah, there is a benefit in it. Now, of course, we all want you to do the deed as well. But if someone were to just study Torah and not do any of the mitzvahs, they would still be connecting with God. That's what's different than any other study. So, for example, let's say you study about the dangers of smoking, yet you still go on and smoke. I would say you completely wasted your time, right? In other words, assuming this person never changes, right? They study their entire lives about the dangers of smoking, and their entire lives they smoke. Completely wasted their time, 100%. However, in Torah study, if you study the laws of kosher and you don't eat any kosher food, could be very hard, of course, but you study the laws of kosher, you don't eat any kosher, you still walk away with something, okay? You still walk away with something of value. This is an interesting thought. But in addition to this, we're going to add on, in addition to this, because as we described a moment ago, when you study Torah, it becomes part of you and you start to think like God, the hope and the idea is when you study as well, especially godly things, because that godly wisdom has become a part of you, it will also change you eventually. Okay? So I would assume, by the way, the same would work in secular. I would assume someone who studies the dangers of smoking, eventually it would change them. I said a moment ago, but if it doesn't, obviously you wasted your time. In Torah study, if you don't change, you didn't waste time. But regardless, the assumption is when you study something, the assumption is since it becomes a part of you, you will change your thinking patterns, and ultimately, you will change. So there are a lot of benefits to study over doing the deed. I'll give another example. Let's say you have a great, wise teacher, and he has a student who never lifts a finger to help him, but sits there and studies from this great, wise teacher. Or conversely, you have somebody who's not very smart, but serves this wise teacher, prints all his flyers, does all his social media, connects him with the world, puts up his recordings on YouTube. So on one hand, without the, public relations guy, without the, guy who's serving the teacher would lose his reach, right? He wouldn't be able to affect the world. At the same time, which of these two people would be able to continue the future of this teacher's teachings? Only the student, because you can know all the social media, you can know all of the things that need to get done, for that, but if you don't have the knowledge, you can't pass it on to the next generation. And so there is a benefit actually to this student who never helped out in any of that, but when his teacher dies, he can continue that. Whereas the guy who knows social media, I mean, what's he gonna do now? Make, TikTok dances or whatever, I'm saying, like, he has no reach anymore. He was a tool. And so in a sense, when we study Torah, we are students of God. When we do mitzvahs, we are servants of God. You can look at it that way. So again, they're both important. I'm just pointing out how the study can be important without the action as well. Through study, you become a student of God. Through the action, you become a servant of God. Now, I want to caution, of course, as well, that it's very likely if you are a student who's really studying Torah deeply and you're not changing anything, it's possible that you're not studying properly. Okay, that's also, you could be twisting everything. So I'm throwing that out there as well, of course. If you really study Torah and nothing changes in your life, the likelihood is that you're probably taking everything in a crooked way, in a crooked manner, twisting everything that you're hearing, taking all that learning in a wrong manner. So I'm not at all to take away from learning, but nevertheless, the study itself, let's put it the other way. If you just do the deed without the study, you're definitely missing a lot, right? We can say it both ways, actually. In fact, the Talmud has this debate. What's greater, Torah study or action? Torah study or action? It goes back and forth. And finally, they say Torah study is better because it leads to action, which is a way of saying that it's not really an answer either. It doesn't answer one. Basically, none is greater. Torah study leads to action. So you need both. Basically, the answer, you need both. But you can't have one without the other. And this is important because a lot of people today do walk around saying, like, the main thing is you're a good person. The main thing is that you act right. And in Judaism, that is important, but you also should change internally. Judaism has a focus on changing our internals as well. Not to say someone who studies and acts bad is better. I'm not saying that, but just acting good without trying to change yourself. Again, changing our inner selves is a lifelong work, and we may never fully get there. Okay, but in Judaism, it is something that we should aspire always to slowly change ourselves. Okay. Over time. And it also makes the battle in action easier. Okay. That makes the battle in our actions easier. I want to point out just an interesting corollary. Anybody here celebrated Sukkot? The holiday of Sukkot. What do we use for a mitzvah on the holiday of Sukkot?
The lulav and the etrog.
The lulav and the etrog, yes. Does anybody know what the lulav and etrog symbolize? And the other parts of the four kinds, what do they symbolize?
I think something about different kinds of people, the 4 different species binding together.
Yes, four different kinds of people, yes. What types of people? Anybody knows? Anybody? Nobody? All right, let me try and jog your memory. So the lulav, the palm frond, comes from a palm tree, a date palm, which has a fruit that tastes good. It doesn't have a good smell. It doesn't have any smell. Then you have the willows, which don't have a good smell and don't have a good taste. Then you have the myrtle, which has a good smell, doesn't taste good. Then you have the citron, the etrog, which tastes good and smells good. Anybody knows what that symbolizes?
Spirit.
The name of God.
What?
The name of God, like the full letter, isn't. I heard something like that before.
What does it symbolize in people? That's possible as well. But what does it symbolize in people?
Goodness.
All right, so taste corresponds to Torah study. You ingest. Smell corresponds to good deeds, spreading out. Others smell it as well. And so therefore you have the four species. Some smell good, some taste good. Some don't smell good and don't taste good. Some have one and not the other. Well, which one do we make the actual blessing on? When you make the blessing on the lulav and etrog, which one do you actually make the blessing on? You make the blessing on the lulav. Very good, the lulav. Netilat lulav. You make a blessing on the lulav. Why the lulav? This is exactly our class here, because the lulav corresponds to the person that has a good taste, the person that studies Torah, because that is the beginning of everything. So we don't make the blessing on the etrog. We make the blessing first starting on the lulav. The lulav corresponds to something that the date palm. That corresponds to something that has a good taste, because that's where everything starts from. It all starts from study, and everything comes from there. So this is just an interesting thing. But this also brings to the idea that we're going to discuss in a moment, that taste, ingestion, food corresponds to Torah, whereas smell, something that spreads, corresponds to mitzvahs that spread to others. So let us take a look. Take a look at the text over here. Okay, so let's read about the benefits of the study of Torah, many of which I have started to give you and present to you. So this is section 2 on page 79, section 2 of chapter 5. So it says like this. This is the endlessly great and wonderful advantage possessed by the mitzvah of knowing and mastering the Torah over all other mitzvahs that involve action, even those mitzvahs connected with speech, since speaking is a type of action. In fact, knowing and mastering the Torah with your mind has an advantage even over the mitzvah of verbalizing the Torah which you study. Why is the mitzvah of knowing the Torah greater than any mitzvah of action? Right? Since with all the mitzvahs involving speech or action, there is a one-way absorption of the person into the divine, as the soul is absorbed in God and surrounded by the light of God from head to foot. Remember, we said with mitzvahs, you're doing God's will. You're not ingesting it. You're doing it. So you're surrounded by God's light when you do a mitzvah, which is beautiful. But as he says, but with the mitzvah of knowing Torah, in addition to your mind being absorbed in the divine wisdom and losing its identity, as we mentioned when you first start studying the concept, you also absorb the divine wisdom into your egoic mind. Oh, that's a cool word, egoic. You absorb the divine wisdom into your egoic mind. As your mind masters, grasps, and absorbs whatever Torah knowledge you're able to absorb and master. So Torah, right? So mitzvahs, you only get the surrounding light. With Torah, you get both the surrounding light and the ingested light. And as he continues, an interesting point. Remember, he says you ingest it. In fact, the capacity to fill being with the divine light is limited in each case according to the person's mind and his cognitive powers and his grasp of the pshat, the literal, remez, the allegorical, the drush, homiletical, and so mystical methods of the Torah interpretation. So he's obviously pointing out that when you study Torah, of course, the amount that you're going to ingest is going to be based on your ability to grasp. This is why when you study Torah, it's important you understand what you're reading. Then he continues. Still, even though your capacity may be limited, filling your being with divine light is particularly powerful because of the mitzvah of knowing the Torah is absorbed in your soul and mind is engulfed by them. So what he's saying is don't be disheartened if you are not the greatest scholar. Whatever you ingest is absorbed in your soul and mind. The inner absorption of divine light is alluded to by scriptural comparison of Torah to bread and food. As he says, this is why the Torah is called bread and food of the soul. Just as a physical bread nourishes your body only when it is actually absorbed in you, and it only keeps you alive after it has been transformed into blood and flesh of your flesh. The same is true with your soul's knowledge and mastery of Torah. When you study it well, focusing the mind to the point where the Torah is absorbed by your intellect, merging with it and becoming one, then it provides nourishment for the soul and life for it from the giver of life, blessed infinite light, which is dressed in his wisdom, his Torah, now absorbed inside it. Torah is compared to bread and food, since it fills your soul with divine light, thereby nourishing and sustaining it. This is the meaning of the verse, your Torah is in my innards. So what we have here is that the Torah that you study, we've been talking about, you absorb it, it's God's will and wisdom, you can become one with it. That's why it's called food. That's why it's called food. It's called food. It's absorbed inside of you. I want to point out another important characteristic about food. Food, after a while, you get hungry again. You eat it, you get hungry again. So it's important to constantly study Torah, because just like food, you eat it, after a while, it gets a little, you get a little hungry, you want some more. So ideally, when you study Torah, you will always thirst for more. That's why the Torah says those who are thirsty for Torah, people are thirsting for Torah, because it's something that you're eating, and hopefully you desire more. Let's read the Hasidic thought that Rabbi Miller puts here on the bottom of the page that we take from this Tanya. He writes like this: when you do a mitzvah, you surrender your will to God's will. The experience of emptying your ego, at least for the moment, allows his infinite light to flood into the empty space you vacate. Your being is grounded God out. Okay? But it is a one-way process. Your ego has to remove itself to let him in, which means that there is something lacking in terms of merging of yourself with God. In a sense, you did not really become one with God. You simply got out of the way so you could occupy your space. In other words, when you do a mitzvah, it's very possible you don't want to do the mitzvah, but you're doing it anyways, which means you don't want it, but you're doing it anyways. So you're, so to speak, putting your ego aside, and you're going ahead and you're doing the action anyways. It's like when I convince my child to do something that they may not want to do. They are at that moment listening, they are connecting, they are doing it, but they may have put themselves aside to do it. In other words, they might be doing it despite themselves. Then he says, with Torah study, you not only vacate the ego, allowing the light of God in, as in the case with every mitzvah, but you also fill the ego with divine wisdom, because the Torah study becomes one with you. You don't get rid of yourself, right? Torah study has to involve you. You have to appreciate it, you have to understand it, you have to connect with it. You can't really vacate your ego to study Torah. Okay, maybe to get yourself to start studying Torah, but the Torah connects with your ego and your entire being. It's a much more involved oneness with God, not just doing it despite yourself, but it has to be a part of yourself. That's why, of course, though, when it comes to Torah study, you can get a lot more pushback. There's a lot more questions, right? In other words, I can easily have someone do a mitzvah that they're not so interested in, right? It stops somebody. Did you put on tefillin today? No. Would you like to put it on? No. Will you do it anyways? Okay, I'll do it anyways, right? That happens, right? But you can study Torah with somebody, and if they really object to the ideas, they're gonna hammer you with the questions, right? Or they're just gonna say, you know, this study is crazy, right? You cannot study something without understanding it. If it doesn't fit in your brain, right? You have to, at some level, appreciate it. Okay, even if, let's say, you don't understand all aspects of it, right? Or there are parts of it that you feel sound a little crazy, but you're accepting that there's a part of it you don't understand, and there are parts of it that you do understand, right? I mean, at the end of the day, listen, Torah study requires a lot of faith. We have to believe in certain of the traditions and pass down oral traditions of how we interpret. But nevertheless, those interpretations themselves, you understand. In other words, once you have faith about those traditions, you can understand those interpretations. But it would be very hard to study something, without you understanding it at all, with riddled with questions, and people who do that don't study. They say, this is silly, this is a silly study. So here's my question to the crowd over here. Is this a new appreciation for Torah study? In other words, do you now appreciate and understand why Torah study is so important? In other words, it's not just a means to an end, but it's such a powerful part of our connection with God, in which we get to sounds weird, to ingest God
Yeah.
into our lives, and how it affects our ego. There is a benefit, of course, to putting our ego aside. There's a place for that, because if we're never willing to put our ego aside, then we'll probably have trouble following God's word. But at the same time, there is an element as well to elevating our ego, because you can't always put yourself away. It's very hard. It's not a great long-term strategy, and therefore Torah study is so important to help us develop ourselves and develop our ego as well. And you can actually transform your ego to be, in a sense, a little bit more about mission. Any questions or comments on what I said so far before I delve more into the food analogy? Nope. You can also put in the comments as well if you want. Yes,
Yes.
Ellen.
So is there any thought of Torah study changing the way you feel? Like, is part of digesting it having like an internally different feeling and perhaps an internally different conversation in your mind?
Very good. Okay. So you're jumping now to the ingestion analogy, which is true, and we're going to delve into it. You're correct. Just like when you ingest something, it changes who you are, practically, whether you get fatter or healthier, whichever, depending on the food you eat. Yes, Torah ultimately should change who you are. In fact, the sages say a great line. They say, a person should always learn, even if it's not for the right reasons, because eventually you will come to doing it for the right reasons. In other words, let's say you're starting to study Torah because someone's going to pay you money to do it, or because it makes people respect you, or because your mother's hocking you a China, you got to study, whatever the reason is. If you start studying for the wrong reasons, eventually it will change you. And you will become a changed person. And hopefully you will come to a point where you will study for the right reasons. I want to point out a couple things. Comprehension is very important in study, because based on what we said till now, the real benefit of Torah is the comprehension, the idea that the oneness that you get with God, the ingestion, all of that only applies if you comprehend the Torah. This is why it says that aside from scripture itself, okay, the written word of God, okay, it says if you read the written word of God, even if you don't understand it, it's considered studying Torah. That's for another time, because it was direct communication from God. We can have a discussion about that, why that's different. But generally, any Torah study, if you study it and you don't understand a word of what you're saying, if you're just reading it, you have not accomplished anything. Because Torah is all about that food, that ingestion, that becoming a part of you. If you are studying something and you do not comprehend it, it doesn't do anything. It's not a worthwhile time spent. Of course, you could, if you're starting to learn how to learn, that's one thing. But if there's no comprehension, then there's no oneness with God. Okay. This is why, by the way, in certain instances, again, depends on your instance, but the Rabbi would tell certain people that were of a certain age, he would tell them, there's so much English Torah study out there today. Maybe for you, it's better not to focus too much on studying how to learn Hebrew, because while learning Hebrew is great, it's not an actual Torah study. And therefore, let's say, you'd spend 5 years of Torah study, 5 years of trying to learn Hebrew, if you're not a linguist, when in that time you could have been studying Torah. Again, it all depends on the scenario. For many people, studying Hebrew is important. But, the hyper focus on being able to learn Hebrew, for some, is not necessarily worthwhile. Okay? To be able to understand Hebrew, some people are not linguists, and for some people who have limited time in their day, right? Someone who's busy, they go to work every day. If they're going to spend just an hour a day studying Hebrew, they're already in their late 60s or whatever, and they may never get a chance to study Torah, because they're just focused on learning to understand Hebrew. I'm not knocking anybody who does study Hebrew, and every case is different, and maybe you can devote some of your day to studying Hebrew. But in many scenarios, spend the time studying Torah. There's so much English out there. The comprehension is what matters. Yes, understanding Hebrew helps comprehension, 100%. But in some scenarios, it's not worth it. And everybody has to know themselves, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? Because Torah studies about the comprehension. Whether you studied it in Hebrew, whether you studied in English, the comprehension is there as well. Just as another interesting idea about talking about the Torah study being food, the Rabbi once discussed how so he said, it says some people, you're supposed to eat 3 meals on Shabbos. So he says, some people, they fulfill the obligation of the 3rd meal on Shabbos by studying Torah. He says, but what if you come up with a novel interpretation in Torah, so you feel full, but after Shabbos, someone disproves your novel interpretation. So ipso facto, it turns out that you never really ate the 3rd meal on Shabbos, and therefore there's a problem. Anyways, so, okay. There was a story actually of, where was that story? Yeah, the story was, there was a man who came to the Rebbe of Kutsk. The Rebbe of Kutsk was known to be very sharpshooter. He would, when he would talk, he would, sharp people, sharp people are. Anyways, so there was one time that somebody who came to him and he wanted to learn how to pray and not to study. So he stopped studying Torah. He was just praying all day and, not getting involved in any Torah study. So the Rebbe of Kutsk called him and told him, it says in the in a Talmud, it says that a person should fill his stomach with the study of the Talmud and the study of Halakha. And he asked him, he says, why does it say that you should fill your stomach with the study of Torah and study of Halakha? Why doesn't it say you should fill your head? Right? Seemingly, study of Torah fills your head. And he answered, he said, because Torah study is supposed to be like filling your stomach. And just as when you fill your stomach with food, you get hungry after a while, Torah study has to be something you constantly do. You eat it, and then you should get hungry again. Okay, now I want to delve more into this food analogy. Oh, I want to say one more thing about food. This is also why there are many people out there who study Kabbalah. Many people out there study Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a very difficult topic. And if you study it at face value, you're not really gaining much comprehension. Maybe you think you are. You're not really. Which is why I personally don't study straight up Kabbalah. I study Hasidic philosophy, which is taking Kabbalistic ideas in ways that we can understand. There are many people today that are into Kabbalah, and you have to be very careful because you can study Kabbalah and really not know a word of what you're saying. Because Kabbalah is esoteric, and you are not fulfilling any obligation of studying Torah if you're reading the original text without any context. So just an important thought of it here. Those who want to study Kabbalah, I know a lot of people study Kabbalah. Anyways, someone writes here, I've been studying Hebrew because knowing how to read is not enough for me anymore. I did it because the Torah is my spirit. Again, every scenario is going to be different. As I always say, ask your LOR, ask your local Orthodox rabbi, whether you should or you shouldn't study Torah. Ask your mentor whether studying Hebrew will be important for you. Okay. We need in life, we need food and we need clothing. Actually, let me talk about food for a moment. Food is a really important analogy. Today food has become a big discussion. Everybody talks about you are what you eat. Today there's the organic foods and the foods that avoid GMOs and whatnot, because we do understand that the food that you ingest makes a difference in who you are. And based on that, I want to say like this. If Torah is like food, we should be very careful what we're ingesting in our minds. Now, just as I'm saying Torah study is food and it becomes part and parcel of you, the same will apply to anything else you study. Anything you study becomes part of who you are. This is why in Judaism, we're actually cautioned about studying other religions. Okay, if you look in Jewish law, you're not really supposed to study other religions. So, well, I'm interested. I want to know. I want to understand. It's a problem because anything you study becomes part of who you are. And even if you ultimately understand that it's wrong, it's an ingested concept in you. I think we all can appreciate that. You know, I could, sometimes I'm searching for something, I come across forums of people who are very anti-religious and they write things. And even though I know they're wrong, thoughts that you read about can percolate in your mind and can cause you doubts. So just because, you know, it's another perspective you're reading, even if you know it's wrong. Today we're into being open-minded and exploring all different ideas. And in Judaism, that's wrong. Okay, it says that, you know, great scholars can get permission to study other religions because they have to understand it for various reasons, maybe to help other people who are getting lost, or maybe they need to know, you know, what's wrong and what's right. But on a general whole, we don't study other religions. You know, people ask me all the time about other religions. And I tell them honestly, like, I'm happy in Judaism and I'm not studying the other religions. Okay, as a rabbi, I have studied a little bit about some of the other ones, but not too much. There are some rabbis who studied a lot to help, you know, let's say Jews are falling into Christianity, or Jews are falling into Islam, or Jews are falling into Buddhism or whatever. Of course, they can study it. But we are warned in the Torah against studying any of these things. Because when you study something, it becomes part of you. And as nice as it is to be open-minded, studying other topics can be detrimental to you. Now, if someone is suffering with doubts, you know, then there may be, an opportunity to study them as well. But on a general rule, we want to study only Torah because, again, based on this understanding that food becomes who you are. And it's hard to get rid of, everybody knows, anybody who's, eaten too much knows how hard is it to get rid of 1 calorie, right? Things that we study, things that we read, things that we see become a part of us. This is especially important with children. This is why what we expose our children to as well. You may be surprised to know, but in many Hasidic circles, many ultra-Orthodox religious circles, we don't really teach the children many secular studies, maybe reading, writing, math, whatever. And people want to know why. And ultimately, really, a lot of these kids do well. They make a living. I mean, they all have big families, and on a whole, most of them are doing fine. Okay, I have a couple siblings who have not gone into the rabbinic field, and they're doing just as well as the rest of the world, if not better, right? And this is without getting an extensive secular education. So again, I'm not really talking about. So what? Because we have a belief, A, that God will help us, and B is that help us find the parnasa that we need to make and where to get it, and B is that we understand that we want to fill our minds with the important things. We want to, everybody understands that what's the most important thing for a child, not how smart they are, but what type of person they are, right? That's the most important thing about a child. Well, we understand that, and therefore we want to teach our children Torah study because we understand that's what will make them the best person they can be. We don't want them to get lost in other topics that will not further that as great as they are, and if it's about making the money. And ultimately, also just an honest assessment. A lot of people, I forget, there's a crazy stat, but how many people that go to college and they don't even make money yet from their college degree as well. So again, I'm not here knocking anybody who has gone to college, but I'm just helping you appreciate the other system that exists because it's made in the New York Times recently. They've done a lot of smear articles in the Orthodox community. But actually the mayor himself, Eric Adams, says, we should look at these schools, look at the exemplary kids that come out of these schools. The mayor came out there, says, why are you so against the yeshiva system? Now, I'm not getting into the whole, debate which goes on in Israel, where you have a bunch of people who study, don't even work. That's a whole nother story, okay? But I'm talking about the average American, the Hasidic, by the way, the Hasidic communities in New York, they're pretty wealthy, a lot of them. Obviously, there's poor ones as well, like any community. But on a whole, I have a lot of cousins as well. Cousins, it's not just siblings, cousins. Everybody's found what to make money on. And most of them are not rabbis, they've all gone on to have successful careers pretty much, not really relying on charity. And this is the reason why we teach our kids Torah study, because we appreciate how much what you study becomes a part of who you are. And therefore we want to teach our children as much as we can, keep them in that format of study. When people meet my children, they're amazed. Wow, look, Menachem Mendel can already read Hebrew and English, by the way, right? Not to put him up there, but right, he reads the Siddur, or like where he can get to in life is because of the amount of time he spends studying Judaic studies, at a young age, and you don't get that if you take, if you do the other model, which is, they go to public school and then they spend 1 hour a week in Hebrew school. Again, everybody here in this class probably did that. I'm not knocking anybody, but I'm helping you appreciate another outlook and value system, which is within many of the religious Orthodox community, which is that we want to teach them the Torah study, which will make them good, upstanding, and great people, and also give them a strong ethic. Because when Torah study is hard, okay? Anybody who's studying Torah, they have a very strong work ethic, okay? And if you have a strong work ethic and you've studied for many years, you're smart, you can then go into business, and it's not very hard, okay? Like I have a sibling, right? He after he finished all his years of yeshiva, he did a 3-month course in, whatever coding or whatever it is, and he's doing okay, right? It's if you have the work ethic and you've studied for all these years, you can go on and do those things. So hopefully next time you read any of these New York Times smear articles or whatever it is, appreciate why we do it this way, because we understand the importance of Torah study, and conversely study of other topics which can affect you, and change who you are and how you think. Living within a more spiritual world allows you to grow in a very, very healthy way. Okay, anyways, that was the side point. Let's end off the Tanya over here. Let's end off this last section over here about comparing Torah and mitzvahs, because I went off a tangent over here. I hope you appreciated my tangent, but or if you have any pushback, I'd love to hear it as well. But anyways, let us move to over here. Section 3. Okay. Now we're going to talk about not only Torah is great for you on this world, because when you study Torah, it becomes part of you and you become one with God. You've ingested God, so to speak, and you connect with him in a way that you cannot in any other way. Whereas mitzvahs only surround you. Now we're going to say how Torah study also affects you in the afterlife. So it says like this. The comparison between Torah and food is also found in Kabbalistic sources. He says like this. As stated in Eitz Chaim section 44 in the 17th. By the way, just before I move on to this, I just want to say my discussion about children also applies in our own lives. We all have rabbit holes we can head on YouTube or study many, many odd things. But if it's not in our line of business, it's not that important. We do better for ourselves studying Torah than studying random facts about things that don't really make a difference in our life. Okay, so he says like this. Anyways, as stated in Eitz Chaim section 44 in the 17th. Okay, chapter 3, that the mitzvahs performed during your life provide the garments for your soul in the afterlife, while the Torah which you studied authentically in this world will be food for your soul in the afterlife, as stated in the Zohar Vayakal. In the afterlife, your soul will be exposed to intense divine revelation, right? I think we had a discussion, like, what does your soul do after it dies? Like, what does it enjoy? It's not enjoying lox and cream cheese bagels. I can tell you that much, right? So what does the soul enjoy? After you pass away, not your soul dies, after you pass away, right? The body dies, the soul moves on, and you get to the heaven, and the soul will bask in the divine light. That's what a soul enjoys. Okay, so to remain comfortable in that environment, it needs A, to protect itself from receiving more revelation than it can handle, kind of like people who like the sun, but you need sunscreen. And B, absorb whatever is safe and comfortable for it. Okay? So the mitzvahs you perform during your lifetime provide garments for the soul and protect it from too much revelation. The Torah you studied in this world enriches the soul's capacity to absorb revelation in the future. So, in other words, garments protect you. They don't nourish you, right? So the mitzvahs you do will protect you. They'll be your sunscreen, so to speak, when you get to the Garden of Eden. But to actually enjoy the divine light is through the Torah study that you studied. It enriches your soul capacity to absorb revelation in the future because it changes your soul's capacity for spirituality. Then he says like this. The term lishma in this case, meaning when you study Torah with the right intentions, is the intention to attach your soul to God through understanding the Torah according to your mind's ability, as written in the Pri Chaim. Learning Torah lishma for its sake usually means that you studied as a divine command for God's sake. Here, lishma is interpreted to mean that you were conscious of the spirit of the Torah's spiritual effect to attach your soul to God, while Eitz Chaim and Zohar drew a distinction between mitzvahs as garments and Torah for food. Tanya will now argue that Torah can act in both capacities as garment and food. He says like this: the soul's food refers to its abilities to internalize divine light. Its garment refers to its sensitivity to transcendent divine lights which cannot be internalized. Therefore, a sage is a blessed man. We said the study of Torah is equal to all the mitzvahs because the mitzvahs are just garments, whereas the Torah is both food and a garment. For the rationale, divine soul, which is absorbed in analyzing the study of Torah, as we had discussed, Torah empowers your soul to both absorb the divine light and to be absorbed in it. In this sense, Torah is both food, which is absorbed in your soul, and a garment by which your soul is surrounded and absorbed. So Torah study basically gets the best of everything. Torah study gets you everything that you need. And then he says like this: the Torah's role as a garment is further enhanced when you articulate the words verbally, since the breath exhaled in the words elicit transcendent divine lights, as stated in the beginning of Pri Chaim. So studying Torah, when you actually say it, it says, when you say the words of Torah, they draw down divine lights that surround you as well. While Torah is primarily an experience of knowledge, the Jewish law requires words of Torah to be verbalized as they are studied. This, the Kabbalah suggests, also endows the experience with the quality of garments of transcendent divine light. In conclusion, by studying Torah, performing mitzvahs in this world, your soul becomes equipped to receive divine revelation in the afterlife. It is Torah study in particular that does this most effectively, especially when you say the words of Torah aloud. So Torah, by the way, is a, sorry, I read that all fast. It's maybe a little too deep, whatever. Torah is both beneficial that you're studying Torah, but study of Torah itself is also a mitzvah, which means Torah gets the benefit of both Torah study and mitzvahs. Particularly, as he's saying here, when you say it out loud, that's the actual mitzvah of Torah study, saying it out loud when you say the words. When you say the words, or you're hearing the words as well, those words become, imagine they're in the air, you know, they're flying around you, and they can become the garments for your soul. There was a story of I recall a story I was told many years ago, just to explain to you a little bit more about this divine soul when it heads to heaven, the importance of the garments and the importance of the internalization. The story goes like this. It says there was once a wagon driver who was a very simple religious Jew, and he just Torah could not penetrate his head. He could not understand anything. So he had learned the prayers by heart, and he was able to live a religious life, and he was a wagon driver his entire life. And one day he passes away. He gets to heaven, and in heaven, he was told that he didn't study any Torah, therefore he wouldn't enjoy any of the spirituality that was in heaven. He had no capacity for it. He didn't have the ability to enjoy the spiritual elevation and divine light in heaven. And therefore he was told, for you, we'll give you a favor. You were a wagon driver. We'll give you a wagon. We'll give you the best horses. We'll give you the flattest road. And you'll sit there and you'll ride this horse forever in eternity and enjoy riding. And it says that one day a tzaddik passed away, and he says, when I pass away, I'll give him the knowledge of Torah, and he'll be able to go up to heaven. This is a story I've been told many times. I don't remember where it came from, but that point of the story was that you can be deserving of heaven. You can be deserving of heaven through the mitzvahs, right? You led a righteous life, but you may not have the capacity for your soul to enjoy the divine light without studying Torah. That's basically what I'm presenting you, what the Tanya here is saying. The Tanya here is saying that the garments enable you to get there, and wearing the right sunscreen and the light can come to you, but you will not be able to appreciate it if you've never studied Torah. And so this is why it's just from a soul perspective, it's important to study Torah to be able to allow you to appreciate God. Because think about it, if you just do the mitzvahs, you're deserving, but you don't have much of an appreciation for God himself. You don't have much of an appreciation for spirituality. You haven't changed yourself, and you haven't connected deeply with the divine. Your soul hasn't been able to change. And so therefore, it's important that we study Torah, if you want to say selfishly as well. In a sense, it could be selfish. If you want that when you get to heaven, you enjoy, then it's not just that you get to heaven, but you have a greater enjoyment. Studying Torah is your ticket. And I just want to put it as an aside. It says that the reward for Torah is primarily in the world to come. In other words, after we pass away in heaven. And the reward for mitzvahs is primarily when Mashiach comes. Why so? Because Torah is much more spiritual. And the soul, after we pass away, is in a more spiritual world. Therefore, the benefit and the reward of Torah is going to be in a more spiritual world, because Torah study is a more spiritual idea. Mitzvahs are more physical, and therefore it makes sense that the reward for mitzvahs is going to be more when the Mashiach comes, when we're going to be rewarded here on this physical earth. So again, Torah study will benefit is a more spiritual thing. Therefore, your soul will benefit more when you go to heaven after you pass away as a soul. Mitzvahs, though, will benefit us more in the times of Mashiach. When the Mashiach comes, that's when we get the real reward for mitzvahs. So the reward for mitzvahs is not so much after we pass away, and maybe you become deserving of heaven by doing the mitzvahs, but the actual reward for the mitzvahs will be felt here in this world when the Mashiach will come. So we have now finished chapters 1 through 5. And we have now finished discussing the godly soul. Next time, we're going to move over to the animal soul. And so hopefully you now understand what it is that the godly soul wants, what the godly soul desires. He wants to do mitzvahs, which is the will of God. It connects him with God and surrounds with the light of God. He wants to study Torah, which is the food of God, and he becomes one with God and connects with God. And he wants to have the feelings towards God, which will enable him to do the right thing. He wants to work on his intellect. These are all the things the godly soul wants. Basically, the godly soul wants to do anything that will connect with God, in short. And we'll soon find out what the animal soul wants, but that will be for next week. I want to have a couple of lessons that you can walk away with from today. Number one, we understood that today Torah study is important because number one, it has the ability to change you. So therefore, it's important to study Torah regardless of whether you're doing the deed yet or not. Number two, we discussed just as food, you get full, you get hungry, you should constantly study Torah. Number three, we discussed that if you want to enjoy heaven more, the study of Torah is going to allow you to have that ability. And hopefully we'll see you all next week. I want to answer a couple of questions. Someone says they listen to Tovia Singer a lot and how he talks about other religions. There is a place for that. But when you're listening to Tovia Singer, you're not really studying the other religion, okay? He's quoting a few verses. I'm talking about literally opening up the New Testament and studying it from cover to cover. That's not appropriate for most Jewish people unless you're struggling with faith and for whatever reason you need to do it, okay? There's exceptions. But on a rule, we're not opening up the Quran, We're not opening up, again, a verse here, a verse there. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about proper study or comparative religions. Again, if you're a professor, you're teaching, whatever, there are exceptions, like everything else. Listening to Tuvi Singer is fine, but to say I'm going to go ahead and study this topic so I can disprove it, that is not something that we should do unless it's necessary. What about the reward for the mitzvahs for those who pass before the Mashiach arrives? When Mashiach comes, there will be the resurrection of the dead. Anybody has any questions or comments? I'm gonna stop the recording for here.
Thank you, Rabbi.